Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Supply Chain Resilience, Overcoming Massive Disruption. I have Professor Zacharia here with us, and he's going to be talking a lot about the supply chain disruption. He is the director of the Center of Supply Chain Research at Lehigh University. He is also the associate professor of the Department of Decision and Technology Analytics. Thanks for joining us, Zach.
Thanks very much for having me, Ivy. I appreciate it.
All right, I have some headlines I want to discuss here with Professor Zacharia. So 75% of companies are reporting supply chain disruptions, and honestly, that could be low right now, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, clearly, when you look at these headlines, you can start to see that there is a huge impact on our economy. As just perhaps elaborating further, with your next 2 points there, 938, I guess, of Fortune 1000 companies had more than, tier 1, tier 2, which we're going to talk about later in the broadcast, are severely impacted by this because they're in China. And of course, everyone can read that 90% of global companies have tier 1 suppliers that are headquartered in the US are affected by this. There's a couple of other things, Ivy, if I could also mention that are headlines. One thing to consider is fashion retailers just came out a couple of days ago, have canceled nearly $1.5 billion worth of orders. Another thing that just came out again, retailers, not just fashion retailers, but Western retailers have been canceling so many orders that millions of factory jobs are being affected in Asia. And finally, something that just came out this morning, Ivy, I don't know if you saw that, the Wall Street Journal reported that 3.28 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits this last week. So this is a huge impact on the economy, and clearly it has global repercussions and implications.
I agree completely, and unfortunately, I've seen some of that impact when I'm sending out my invites for these webinars, and I'm getting that response that they're no longer with the company, or they're just not working until this passes. So there's a different ways. I mean, the unemployment, yes, but some people aren't even able to continue their normal job, but will be resuming work. So yes, definitely seeing that impact. So I want to go ahead and outline the agenda here. We are going to talk about how COVID-19 compares to other supply chain disruptions that we've seen and that Professor Zacharia is teaching about in his classes at Lehigh, and then how that's impacting supply and demand, as well as, and I know a lot of you want to know, what can I do right now to solve this problem in the near term, and how am I going to make it to the future, whether that be a 1 month, right now everybody's saying middle of April, whether that be May, or whether that be next year, what does that mean for us? So we're going to talk about that. And then Professor Zacharia is open to your questions at the end. So go ahead and submit those. I know I've seen some come in already, so thank you. So the first thing I'm going to do is start us all off with a poll question. Are you reducing operating costs, accelerating the transition to e-commerce and dropship fulfillment? I know a lot of retailers have done that, shutting down their actual brick and mortar store and trying to move to e-commerce. Are you implementing, split shifts to maintain social distancing, evaluating options on additional lines of credit, meeting with the banks and talking about how you can get through this, reconfiguring your assortment to accommodate any supply chain fluctuation, whether it be extremely high demand or on the lower end, and maybe you're not seeing that. But I think it's critically important to understand where our peers are and what we are doing as a community to try to solve these problems. A lot of people are reducing operating costs. 72% of you that answered the poll, you're accelerating that transition to e-commerce and dropship fulfillment, which I would expect, and we've seen, doing the split shifts for social distancing, that physical distancing, so that you can still resume business. 17% of you are looking for additional lines of credit and 47% are reconfiguring your assortment to accommodate the supply chain fluctuation. So moving back into the presentation, how is COVID-19 comparing with other supply chain disruptions?
So that's a great question. But before we actually get into that question, we should actually just talk about supply chain disruptions in general. There's a lot of research that has been looking for, what are sampled, what are kinds of disruptions that actually cause a lot of problems in the supply chain. And as you can see in that slide, you've got the top 7 supply chain disruptions over the last 10 years. And it's in, the most critical are up first, and it goes down to the least in that list from 1 to 7. So the most critical ones that are standard supply chain disruptions are unplanned information technology or telecommunications. Number 2 is adverse weather. You've got the hurricanes, those kinds of things affect your supply chain. Third is if your actual transportation network, things like port strikes, cruise or your actual shipping lanes gets affected. Fourth is if your 3PL companies that are actually delivering your products or warehousing your products, those have some sort of a problem. But then fifth, you've got, you don't have the right kind of people. So that's not enabling you to be able to deliver the kind of products that you really want to do. Cyber attack is number 6. And finally, looking at the top 7, we're rounding up looking at regulations, tariffs, that's also affected supply chain. So those are all sort of the planned kinds of things that you can actually plan for. And I want to differentiate between risk and uncertainty. Risk is things that you know are going to happen and you can actually get a probability. Uncertainty are things that you just do not know, which brings up this slide about what we call black swan events. Black swan events are those kinds of events that are unpredictable, that it's clearly beyond what is normally expected and has potentially severe consequences. So the one there, since we've got a really nice timeline, 9/11. No one could predict what happened, and it happened. It had a significant impact on demand. The next one we've got there is the SARS epidemic, 2002, 2003. And this actually affected supply because those were companies that were working in China. It reduced supply to be able to supply the supply chain. 2008, the recession that happened, the financial crisis, that affected demand because all of a sudden demand really contracted. 2011, you had that earthquake and tsunami in Japan. And what was interesting about this is that it directly affected the automotive supply chain and the high-tech industry worldwide. A lot of these supply chains was concentrated. Specific parts were actually happening in Japan. And very simple quote: you can't build 99% of a car, right? I mean, if you're missing one part, you're stuck. So there was a shift after that tsunami to shift production from Japan actually moving into China. Then you had the Ebola virus, 2013. The Ebola virus is very much concentrated in Western Africa. So it really, one of the things I should just take a second to say that the Ebola virus, even though it's extremely virulent, is that people actually got sick. They were lying flat on their back before you could spread the virus, which meant that the virus was very contained. It never went very far. COVID-19 is clearly much, much greater impact. And really the reason is that because it hits both the supply side and the demand side. So now you really have to talk about how does that do that? Well, first of all, we know that it really started off just like the SARS epidemic. It started off in China, in the Wuhan district. Here's one thing that's really interesting. Consider if you're just looking at the SARS epidemic versus what happened. At the time that the SARS epidemic happened, China made up about 4% of the world's GDP. Now, in 2018, China made up about 18.7%. It was about 19.7 in 2019, and we're clearly thinking it's almost 20% of world GDP. So when the suppliers of 20% of the world is not able to meet the demand, that's going to have a huge impact, right? So that's the one side, the supply side. Employees who are manufacturing in China are not getting wages to buy more product. This brings up to the third point. Consumers here in the US are significantly affected by COVID-19. All of you know we're performing social distancing. And by the way, if I could just, I want to say we're actually practicing physical distance. I think whoever picked the word social distance really should be physical distance. I know that we're all trying to contact each other on the social side, but going
I
back to
think we're more social now than we were before.
absolutely. We're finding reasons to actually, talk to our relatives that we might not have talked to in a long while. Consumer purchasing has makes up about 70% of US GDP. And so it's a huge driver in the US market. The minute that you've stopped consumers from going out and purchasing, you've directly affected the US market. The fourth point I've got there, China is clearly not just a supplier market, it's also a consumer. They're importing a lot of products. And when China is not buying as much products from the US and the rest of the world, that's affecting the supply side. So, and the demand side. So clearly, I think I want to just draw that final line that COVID-19 is affecting both supply and demand, huge impact. And here's the final sort of scary point there. There's more likelihood or more chances that this is going to happen again in the future. So we need to be prepared.
So how is it impacting the people in the United States?
One of the first things that you start to see is that people start to panic, and there's a lot of information out there that says that people should really plan for 1 week worth of supply or at maximum 2 weeks worth of supply because we can all go to go to the grocery store. They're practicing physical distance and those kinds of things. But guess what people are doing? People are actually hoarding. And when you start to hoard and you start to just collect enough goods that's going to last you 6 months, it puts an incredible strain on the supply chain. And that's what's happening when you're seeing empty shelves. And to really sort of explain this, what we're doing, it's worthwhile to consider what happens in a typical or traditional supply chain when we're talking about forecasting. Because all of us in a traditional supply chain try and predict what the demand is going to be and try and make sure that we have enough inventory to meet that demand. As you can see, let's take a standard retail supply chain. Let's say you are selling 1,000 bottles of water a day. And just for example, let's assume that each case holds 50 bottles of water. 20 people came in, they each bought a case. That's 1,000 bottles. Let's say the next day, 21 people came in, but you only had 1,000 bottles because you're a retailer and you did not have enough demand or enough another case of bottles. So then what you said was, look, I'm going to call up my wholesaler and I'm going to tell them I want to increase my demand, my order by 10%.
Mm-hmm.
The wholesaler, seeing that it's increased by 10%, goes, oh, wait a sec, there's a bump here. I better make sure that I have enough to meet their demand, and maybe just in case if this is a trend, I want to order some more. So they'll add another 10%. This goes to the manufacturer. They could add 10%, and to the raw material supplier, they'll add 10%. Well, look what has happened. The error has propagated through the supply chain, and you are going to go, instead of 10%, it goes all the way up to 46%. And now this is this idea of the bullwhip effect. There is your consumer, okay? The consumer is there, and it's a bullwhip because you could see that a small action at the very front end of the supply chain causes increased variability as you go further down the supply chain, all the way upstream to the final supplier. So now you could actually look at the formal definition of that, and there's the actual definition. It's the increasing variability of demand as one moves upstream. And why does this thing happen? Because you have distorted and or delayed information. People don't know what's actually going to happen, so they buy a lot more. Long lead times. It takes a while for the product to go through the supply chain. And it's worthwhile noticing here in the US, we're going to be okay. We are going to be able to recover, but you are going to go through this where you have some empty shelves. Or you have order batching, right? People wait till they have a full truckload before they can send the product. Overreaction, that's another thing, another cause of the bullwhip effect. And finally, hoarding. A lot of people will buy early thinking that they've got to make, have it because they're going to run out. So that's sort of the bullwhip effect. Now let's sort of look and see what is a solution, or how could we improve that and eliminate the bullwhip effect? Well, this is where we actually start to talk about coordination. And that is, what if the retailer says, I'm going to order that extra 100 bottles, but I'm going to show that to everybody along the supply chain. So the wholesaler, the manufacturer, supplier, they all see it. And so now the actual error is only 10% because they don't have to keep on adding to that order. So this is this idea of coordination, of data sharing, information sharing, and sort of collaboration. And remember, one of the things is that we should be able to handle that 10% increase in demand or decrease in demand. But that is sort of the way that, if you share information, you can reduce or significantly decrease the bullwhip effect. Here are 5 things you could do. Number 1, share the information. Information sharing along the supply chain, huge. Better forecasting. If you think the demand is going to change, forecast that demand and let the people in your supply chain know. Figure out ways to reduce lead time. Can you manufacture it faster? Can you use different and faster shipment methods so that the product arrives quicker to reduce the lead time? Decrease order size. Try and not wait for this huge batch. In fact, go with smaller orders so that product enters the supply chain so it meets immediate demand. Finally, figure out a way to collaborate. Try and share information. And one of the things that we should really distinguish, collaboration is not just cooperating. Collaboration is where the person you're collaborating with, their success is just as important as your success. When you start to think about their success and them being successful, that's when you're starting to think about collaboration.
I want you all to know that I actually got this lesson when I was interviewing Professor Zacharia about the difference between collaboration and actually being considerate of your neighbor, rather than us just sharing information, but not as people collaborating with our suppliers.
Excellent. Good
I might point. Pass your class too.
You'll do well in my class, I'm sure.
Thank you. So let's take a time out here, catch your breath, Professor Zacharia, and we're going to do another poll question. It's launched. So it says, what software has been most helpful in managing ordering and fulfillment during this time? This is actually a question that I had sent to me after I sent out my webinar invite. People are wanting to know what their peers are using to get ahead, to manage this, not even to get ahead, to stay afloat and to make sure that we can push through this near term and long term. And we're going to be discussing that in the next section. So you will see this translate into the next section that Professor Zacharia is going to talk about. What's the most helpful? Has it been transportation management? Has it been order management? Are you looking at warehouse management? Is it EDI? Or is there something else that you're using that you're finding beneficial? So what software has been the most helpful in managing ordering and fulfillment during this time? 3% of you said transportation management, 51% order management, 14% warehouse management, 27% is EDI, and 5% other. Your next question. So how should companies respond in the near term and plan for the long term with what's going on?
Excellent. So yes, in these kinds of situations, when we clearly have a black swan event, we can, we have to separate out the difference between what we can do in the short term and the long term. So in the short term, we really need to look at ways to encourage or build confidence in your supply chain. And to actually build that, you've got to figure out ways that you can be transparent to the members in your supply chain. You got to let them know if you are seeing a real reduction in demand. So let's take, steps in place where we might have to postpone orders. We have to figure out some ways to hold up systems. We're getting notes from retailers that are now sending, messages back to China to say, don't fill the containers because we don't know if we can handle the containers when they get here, and we don't see the demand right now. Let's realize what the situation we're in. So share information. And then, you can't necessarily fire all those suppliers either, because we're all in this thing together. And let's be clear, this is a blip. It's a very, very strong economic impact. And of course, really, really have to also be aware that, human lives are at stake. So this is not just an economic thing. This is clearly affects, lives and will affect the death toll. And these are all things that are going to happen. But it's also important to realize that we are going to survive this, that this is not, forever and ever. It's not final in any sense. So in the short term, let's look at ways to share the information, work collaboratively, and improve the visibility in the supply chain. But before I really get into the long term, I need to actually talk a little bit about resilience. So it's the capacity of a system to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of unforeseen changes, even during catastrophic incidents. Now, the word resilience comes from, material property, where something has the ability to deform and then retain back to its original shape. Rubber is viewed as very resilient because no matter if you deform it, it'll come back. So that makes sense in the term of resilience. But what does that mean when we're talking about a resilient supply chain? Let's translate that. Well, a resilient supply chain is something that's going to be able to detect that early signs of a disruption and be able to shift production, okay, from one location or look for other locations. Now, COVID-19, if you didn't have all your suppliers in China, and let's say you had some of your suppliers in Europe, it still wouldn't have made a difference in this particular case. But normally, a resilient supply chain is where you're not geographically located in one place, or you're not just limited to one supplier. Another thing, a resilient supply chain, is that you have alternative ways to distribute the product, right? So if one shipping method doesn't work, you could switch to something else. Those kinds of supply chains, you have to develop contingency plans. What happens? Do what if scenarios and what if analysis. Develop redundancies in your supply chain. Make sure that you have, 2 or 3 suppliers and maybe a 4th alternate supplier that is in a different location. So all of these things will help make your supply chain more resilient. Now, that's sort of at the long-term level. If I wanted to focus within the firm, and this actually brings this idea of this next view, which is a resilient supply chain, but an internal focus. Here are some of the things that I would think that a company needs to do right now within their supply chain. Number one thing, and I've done a lot of research on disruption and disruption and how companies should behave. And in our analysis, we were able to show that instead of relying on a binder of rules that you should do if such and such things happen, you're much better off in doing what was called a war room. And a war room is this idea that you would get a bunch of your experts together in one place. Now with physical distancing, maybe you're doing this virtually, but you're going to get together so you can actually collaborate and come up with ideas and what you need to do to deal with the issues right now. And I'm sure companies are doing this all over as we speak, to be able to really withstand and understand what to do. Second thing you need to do is reach out to your tier 1 suppliers. And remember, your tier 1s are the ones that you actually buy from directly. Ask them, what are they doing in their supply chain? Are they going to be able to supply to you during this pandemic time, and perhaps after, once the pandemic is essentially controlled? Look into your tier 2 suppliers. So those are the suppliers who supply to your tier 1. See if you can see their inventory position. Have some visibility on what issues they're facing. This is the time perhaps to identify alternative sources of supply. Think of other things that you could possibly do. And maybe this might be the time to perhaps decouple the reliance on perhaps starting with the Chinese manufacturing, or maybe we want to consider bringing some of that manufacturing back here into the US. This could be a chance to rethink. Anytime you think of a threat to your supply chain, I mean, in general, another way to look at it is an opportunity. And this could be the time to rethink your entire supply chain. It's an opportunity to rethink your inventory policy. Ivy, one of the reasons that we had this kind of a disruption is that over the years, we have spent in supply chain a lot of time optimizing the supply chain to reduce inventory, which means you don't have a lot of buffer stock.
Yeah.
And when you run out of inventory, we keep only a few days worth of supply, you can feel the impact much, much more. So maybe you need to rethink your inventory policy. Maybe you need to think about capacity, capacity not just in terms of manufacturing, but capacity in terms of distribution. How are you getting that product delivered to to your customer and to perhaps the end consumer? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, think about the global viewpoint. Clearly, in COVID-19, you are not necessarily, you're kind of stuck because the entire globe is being affected by this, but it's a chance to rethink your global strategy. Hopefully that made sense when I'm talking about, within the firm.
Yes, thank you. So these are things that they should be doing internally within their company and looking at this and preparing. And I'm sure, as you mentioned in the Black Swan events, people were prepared for things that may hit supply or may hit demand, but not both to the level that COVID-19 has done, which is why we want to talk more about long term and how, now that we know kind of what things we should be doing right now to pull through, what are we going to do in that long term outlook to keep going?
Well, again, within the firm, speaking about within the firm, think about ways to still, break down functional silos. Now, I belong to a university, and I know that even though I teach the topic, functional silos are so evident. You've got, the business school is in a completely different field than arts and sciences or the engineering school. We have silos, and it's natural in most companies to have the purchasing department be distinct from perhaps the forecasting department and then perhaps operations. So one of the first things that people can do in their company is figure out ways that they can actually talk to each other within the firm. So break down the silos that already exist within
Mm-hmm.
your firm. Look at ways to get end-to-end visibility. And what I mean by that is that the more clear you are on your suppliers, and we talk about it in tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, the more likelihood that you are prepared for any kind of disruptions. Honda is famous for going back 3 tiers and talking to the tier, the third tier. They didn't go back to the 4th tier, and there's a very famous story about how the 4th tier supplier for this particular automotive supply chain for Honda also supplied Toyota. And this particular company actually made a component in the white pigment that they used to spray on their cars. And both of them ran out of that particular product. And so they couldn't make white cars. And so here's this idea. If you go back far enough, you're able to change and respond. Mattel had that problem where their suppliers knew never to put lead paint onto toys, but that supplier got very stuck and went to another supplier, second tier. All of a sudden, you had lead paint. Huge problem in their disruption. So look at ways you can improve the end-to-end visibility. I know I sound like a broken record, but try and figure out how to develop collaborative relationships. Because if you're collaborating with your suppliers, you are going to be able to respond. And this is this idea of being agile, responsive, meaning you respond quickly. You don't wait for this thing to happen, and you have the capability of being able to change. Remember, I talked about this idea of being able to handle 10% increase in demand and 10% decrease in demand. Both of those things allow you to be more responsive, more agile. And finally, allowing yourself to reconfigure the supply chain because you want to take advantage of an opportunity or responding to a threat. And I know that a lot of us really feel that this particular situation is extremely threatening, but I want to say that things will change and we need to be prepared for when things will change.
Right, thank you. My final thought is we are in this together. So there are various unknowns in every scenario that we're going to have. Please reach out to DiCentral or to me at my email right here and get us your questions. Give us information. What can we do for you and how can we help you through this? We can use our network. I know we've worked with Professor Zacharia before, and he was willing to come on today to talk to you all. All right, we're going to move to the Q&A. I'm going to start off with some that I actually received prior to via email. I did ask if anybody had any questions and kind of promised them they'd be first in the queue. So, I guess the $1 million question is, how long is this going to last?
Oh my goodness. If
I
I
know.
knew that, I'd be buying, stock and everything else that we all need to do. So clearly, I don't have a crystal ball. But I do want to emphasize that U.S. has, we here in the U.S. is one of the best supply chain, transportation infrastructure, well-designed kind of processes and policies that will actually enable us to recover more quickly than perhaps other economies in the world. So I think that I clearly, don't know when it's going to actually happen, but we are going to be able to go through this thing. We're going to be able to come up with procedures and processes in place. Physical distancing is going to get reduced, and our economy is going to start moving again. And we have the processes and capabilities in the supply chain to be able to respond to that increase in demand that is surely going to happen, I think, relatively soon.
Next question is, how are suppliers adapting?
Well, so I mean, in the supply chain, clearly you're seeing already some adaptations that are going on. I'm sure you saw, Wall Street Journal reported that you had some of these very large food suppliers that used to primarily serve not just the retail stores, but restaurants, have looked at retooling their supply chain so that they can get more product down to the grocery store. You're seeing people are staying home. They're looking at easy to prepare kind of products. So there's some retooling that are actually going on. So manufacturers are also looking at ways that they could perhaps manufacture products during this time. We're short on ventilators, and we're short on masks. These kinds of things can be produced. We have an incredibly robust manufacturing system still here in the U.S., and we can produce that. So you can see that members of the supply chain are adapting and changing as the demand is changing, and you're seeing products are getting shipped. I have an opportunity. So in my Center for Supply Chain Research at Lehigh University, I have a number of people who are on my board who work in these many large organizations, and they've told us that they're adapting. They're adopting processes like shift work. They're making sure that there is more spacing between the people who actually come. One company I know is actually having people come on one day, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the other is Mondays and Wednesdays, and then Fridays. Again, they're looking at ways. So we're adapting.
I
and
agree.
and I think that there's one other thing that just happened very, very recently, and I don't know if your viewers know this thing, but there has been a significant increase in prices for air freight. And I'm sure most of you know this, is that 50% of all air freight actually travels on passenger aircraft. Since there's been a significant decrease in passenger aircraft, there has now been a shift. Freight capacity is now curtailed, 50% has gone out, so prices have gone up. And some of the airlines are actually retrofitting or just, putting boxes on seats and filling up the aisles and filling up the belly of the aircraft so that they can actually ship freight. So here are some of the ways that we're adapting the supply chain to the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's actually a perfect segue into my next question about shipping costs. What have we seen in shipping costs?
Well, where the price of air freight has gone up, there's still too much supply on the shipping side of it. Containers that are coming from China to here, and our ships going out. I mean, there's obviously constraint going on in the ports, and as I mentioned earlier, some of our big retailers here have been sending messages to their suppliers or canceling orders. So you are actually seeing some of the large shipping lines that actually are trying to take out ships out of those lines so they can reduce some of the capacity so the prices come back. So shipping prices have gone down. Oil prices are, again, are fluctuating. As you know, they went down very, very low and they're starting to come back up. But so I can only speak confidently about the air freight. I know that air freight prices have gone up significantly, such that now airlines are retrofitting their planes to be able to take advantage of these things, because now we're shipping product via air. We're trying to make that happen.
I saw a picture of that this morning with boxes strapped in the seats on the airplane. So I think we're all getting a similar feel for what's going on. I would like to share someone's thoughts, and they're asking what you think. So one option to minimize disruption in your business might be placing limits on customer orders. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that we can always do is that, yeah, and you can see this right now in the grocery stores where people were hoarding and they said, let's just limit 1 dozen eggs, or 5 dozen, whatever the limit is that you normally have, because it goes back to this idea of collaboration. If you can work with your customers, and remember, I sort of focused a little bit on the suppliers, but if you can tell your customers also to limit their orders, and we can feel that they should start to feel that your success will also predicate on their success. There's this idea, and I really like that last line, the last slide that you put in, where it was, we're in this together. So I think this is a great example where if you can work with your customers to limit your orders, because the other thing that companies usually do, and I've done research on this as well, where when you don't have enough, which is a constrained situation, what do? You decide that you're only going to help out your prime, your best customers, and you literally are going to let your other customers actually just wither, suffer. And that has never been the best answer. Even your best customers can understand that there are constraints on supply, and you need to keep all of your customers, not just your A customers. So one of the things in our research, we've looked at ways that if you are willing to share information and you point out what is really happening, you'll be surprised how much your customers understand that, and they're willing to forego that. It's when there is not transparency and people think you're hiding, they will double the order because they figure, oh, you're only going to give us 50%, I'll just double the order. Then you have this mismatch, which is, again, the bullet effect. So great question. I know I'm a professor. I might have spent too much time answering that one question, but yes, that's my answer.
No, perfect. We're actually getting some compliments on how in depth we're going on some comments. So thank you all for your input. So I have another question for you. So how can supply chains who've come to a standstill deal with the crisis?
That's the one thing that, among many things, that is the one thing that people tend to worry about, because supply chains rely on flow. One of the things we always talk about is flow of product, flow of information, flow of cash. Product goes one direction, cash goes up, the opposite direction. So one of the things that we really can't, or we have a hard time restarting, is when you absolutely put something to a stop, because the system is designed for some amount of product to go through, and it takes a lot of inertia, a lot of time and effort to get that flow restarted again. So I cannot talk to a specific supply chain. I can only talk about operations. And when we talk about operations, we tend to really make this very clear that whenever you come to a complete stop, you have to spend a lot of time to restart that supply chain. That you're better off taking some losses and having some product flow through. So I cannot talk about the specific example, and maybe in that particular example, it makes sense that you would actually stop it. But it's just in an operation sense, when we do analysis, we try and figure out, is there a way that we could reduce it, but still have flow going through so that some processes are taken into account? Because when you stop everything completely, there's nothing in the supply chain. It takes a lot of effort, far greater effort, to get that thing started and back through the process.
Right. I'd like to give an example. I was reading an article about a clothing manufacturer that is adapting. As we talked about, these suppliers are having to adapt. So it's a clothing manufacturer that's now adapting, building masks and scrubs and supplies for nurses. So you're seeing that a lot where these manufacturers have quickly shifted and are now producing other products so that they don't have to completely stop. And it's about helping each other and considering your neighbor as a community and what they need, which is something that we talked about earlier, right? So that information sharing, and we all know that things are in short supply right now. And if making something that is not what you typically do is something you're capable of, it's helping, and it at least keeps your supply chain moving and your operations moving so they don't come to a complete standstill.
Absolutely. And the transportation, the trucks are still needing to go through. They're still shipping product, because the supply chain has to be working. Estee Lauder, I guess last week announced that they're making hand sanitizers instead of perfume, and that's making a difference, right? So I know it sounds very trivial, but is there any opportunities that we could look at and not just consider and focus on the threat? Again, it's sort of at least use this time to rethink your supply chain. Is there something else that can be done?
All right. We're going to take one last question. So, what is going on with the supply chain in China right now?
Well, one of the things that we want to realize with is that so Wuhan, the factories have started to come back, the consumers have started to come back, and they are actually starting to build product. Clearly, a lot of evidence is there that they are ready now to start shipping product and all those things. But you have this issue where containers are sort of piling up because because you need to have demand to draw those containers over here on this side. So there is a lot of uncertainty. So even though the factories have started and they've started preparing product, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the demand on this side. So I think that all research is the data that's coming out is that they have weathered the storm of COVID-19, and people are coming back. They're starting to, factories are opening. So in all likelihood, they are ready to start shipping product, and we are now going through this phase. It clearly suggests to us that countries can survive this phase, can recover, and will be shipping product, and consumer demand will come back. So all in all, I think that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel that's happening in China. They've gotten through it. I think that we too can survive and grow and become even better and become a more resilient economy.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time today, Professor Zacharia, and
you're absolutely welcome.
You did a wonderful job.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you everyone for listening. There will be a recording available after the live event, so expect that via email, and please submit any questions that you have. We're here to help. We'll use our network to help. We'll try to stump Professor Zacharia with any supply chain questions that we can.
Not very hard to do.
And I just want to thank you all for supporting DiCentral webinars. Stay tuned and follow us on DiCentral on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you.